friends, if you're like me, you're very excited about all the cottagecore stuff because you always wanted to wear puff sleeves, thanks to Anne from Anne of Green Gables, and now you finally get a chance to do it. Or you're a photographer that wants to talk about bad weather. That sounds like you, we should talk. So this is a video that is a suggestion that I got from Diana Askeruns. She says, how do you change up the way that you shoot when the weather's crappy? Do you bring a fill light, reschedule altogether? I typically deal, but I'm kind of over how much more difficult it is to edit later on. Help! This is a great topic, and it's one that I'm happy to talk about. I was actually prepared to talk specifically about lighting and go out and do a live shoot, but surprise, the weather isn't doing what we're supposed to be doing, which is perfectly on brand for what we're going to be talking about today, which is just whenever the weather's not doing the things that we want it to. I wanted it to be nice and overcast. It's really nice out, which is probably saving like the kids in my neighborhood from thinking that there's a Victorian woman that haunts their neighborhood or whatever. I will be recording a second Patreon video the next day this month that it is overcast, which I'm sure will come super soon so that we can talk a little bit more specifically about how to deal with the lighting. I'm very excited to talk today because we are going to talk about specifically how to deal with crappy weather, and even if it's something that we even bother to do, because maybe it's not something that we bother to do. I, in addition to all of the other wonderful health issues that I have Raynaud's, which means that my fingers and toes will go completely numb and white and they look terrifying, and then they start turning blue, and anyway, it sucks. If it's going to be below 70, I bring hot hands with me, and if it's going to be below 50, I bring these socks, which are electrical socks. They are warming socks. These come in handy because I was at a shoot earlier this year where I slipped and fell in a salt puddle. Everything was frozen, but they put enough salt on the ground that it melted, and it was like the one puddle that was in the world that day, and I fell in it, and I was like wet all the way up my leg. But I was able to still keep shooting for an hour because I have these. So this is something that I just wanted to throw out there as being really helpful. I know now it's going to be summertime, but if you're dealing with inclement weather like snow or rain, these are super helpful for me. The biggest thing that I'm going to say is to make sure that you have a microfiber towel. These are super cheap. You can buy them for cars and stuff. They're really nice because they're absorbent. I always bring lens cloths with me, but lens cloths aren't really that absorbent. These are great because it'll get a lot of the water off your stuff. So I definitely recommend carrying something with microfiber. This might be stuff that you already know, but I'm telling you in case you don't know, because I went through a period of time where I would just like wipe my lenses off on whatever I was wearing just over and over. And I also have this really bad habit. I hold my camera like this when I'm not shooting. And so like that's not great when it's raining, but that's the thing that I do. And so this has helped me a little bit with this. Also, our cameras. So I am using the EOS R6s, and I'm not using them with the R series lenses. I'm using them with the EF series lenses, which means I'm using the adapter. And I did look it up. This is technically, it's not waterproof, but it's water safe and dust safe because there's like rubber stuff in it. So technically you are just as safe using your regular lenses or your EF series lenses as you are with the R series lenses. Having this extra adapter isn't making you any worse off. I definitely shoot dual bodies anytime it's raining because I don't want to get water on my sensor, because that's always a possibility. Same with sand, but when it's raining, it is the one time that I will leave things like my tilt shift at home. Your tilt shift is not water safe in any way. There's all these open spaces where water can get in, and so you want to make sure that if you have anything like a tilt shift, or if you're using a non-Canon or non-Sigma lens, you want to make sure that you look it up and make sure that it is water safe, so that way just wiping it down is going to make sure that you are nice and safe. I really like this lens for the sun lens flare too, so if I even know it's going to be an overcast day, sometimes I won't bring my 45 tilt shift. But I just wanted to say those couple of things because I think that that's important, but I don't always know if it's something that we're thinking about, or you might be thinking that your gear is more precious than it is and it can get a little bit wet. It's fine. Whenever I worked at a newspaper, I had this crazy water system thing that I was supposed to use on my camera, and I never did it. It wasn't my camera, so maybe I should have. It was like this plastic raincoat thing that went over my camera, and it like extended down my 70 to 200. And if I were shooting sports in a lot of rain, I imagine I probably would use it, but for what I was using it for the most part, I was going out in the rain and it was getting like sprinkled on a little bit. It wasn't big old alligator tears. But I am going to share some examples with you today of some rainy weather and what that looks like. But I did want to share with you my reschedule policy for rainy days because I have one and it's super easy and flexible. One thing that I started doing last year is I started asking people if they wanted to go ahead and choose a rain backup date. So I would send them a date that works for me and whatever the potential backup date is. It did fill up my calendar quite a bit, but my worst case scenario is that maybe I get a little bit of time off. And I will, on occasion, when things are busy and and like packing a bunch of stuff in. I will let people know, hey, you can definitely have this date, but it is somebody else's backup session, so we might have to be more flexible with the timing. Those are conversations that I like to have early on with people. I think it makes me look more flexible, which makes me look like a cool photographer. It makes the process a lot easier, and I think it especially helps ease the minds of parents. I also put it out there that I'm happy to reschedule for any reason, even if it's just like an especially cranky day for kids. So I won't necessarily always shoot in the rain just because I have made it really easy for people to reschedule. I just ask that people make the call by noon the day before a shoot, especially if it's a sunrise session. So I want to make sure that I have plenty of time. So that is how I handle rescheduling. I try to make it really easy for people to do backup plans, and I let them know that my goal is just for them to love their pictures, and if their dream is for us to have really nice golden sunset lighting, then I want to make that possible as much as I can. But I shoot in overcast weather all the time, and I sing the praises of overcast lighting. I'm like, no, it's amazing. It's like there's a giant softbox in the sky. It's not what everybody wants, and I get that, but I do give rain backup plans. I do have plans in case it does rain. I have very comfortable rain shoes that I could literally shoot in all day. Anyway, we are going to jump into some examples looking at some bad weather and what those backup plans look like depending on what the shoot is. So let's look at some examples. So sometimes the rain plan is exactly what you think it's going to be. If it's a wedding day, especially, sometimes they're like, I'm cool with it, and I'm always cool with it. I do not want to be the thing that is creating friction on a wedding day as much as possible, so I'm down for anything. So if they want to grab umbrellas and go out and shoot, that is what we do. This was a day where the rain was letting up a little bit, so we did end up getting to do some portraits, which was really nice. But we still ended up going inside for some. I love a good puddle photo, and I also think it's really nice for us to embrace something that made their wedding day their wedding day. So if I can get photos of the rain, then I'm definitely going to. So I'll take a photo like this just to represent like the day and what we did. This was a wedding that it didn't end up being super rainy, but they were scared of the impending rain that might happen. So we ended up doing this first look inside of this barn, which I really loved. This was a very rainy day, and they didn't want to reschedule because they were only here for one day. So I ended up recommending a place that had a little bit of shelter. So we went under here. It was very cute. You can actually see that it was raining here. It was definitely a very rainy day. But I think the goal should always be, whenever everything is super even, is to try to find any way to create shadow and to create some variation in lighting. So by putting their heads together, by getting close up, by creating some shadows with them just being close to each other, I think it helps make it look a little bit less flat. And I sort of had them walk up to a forested area, which meant that you can see the entire front of them is going to be very much in shade at this point. So having her look up a little bit more dramatically is going to be a little bit more flattering on our face, because the light source that we have is coming from directly above and sort of like behind us at this point. They also wanted to do something inside, specifically at a grocery store. So they bought these like tuna sub things that they love. We're going to shoot right in front of the thin cut kettle style potato chips. That is the manager of Eddie's, who was very excited that we were in his grocery store. So I put them underneath this spotlight, which I thought was really fun. And we ended up shooting some pictures in the spotlight. So this is just using a random spotlight that was in the grocery store. So this is a day that I was excited to show you because it was legit super duper rainy. Here it's nice out. It was a really sunny morning, and then all of a sudden the rain started pouring down. And you can see how rainy it is in this picture because this is the biggest bridal party picture, and you can see all the little raindrops. But basically we just found a place to shove them so that they would be dry while I stood out in the rain. And I believe this picture is by Lindsay Ann LA Birdie. She's a local photographer who's amazing. So I was just standing out in the rainiest rain and shooting them in the shelter. And then of course it was like sunny within like 15 minutes after we were done, but we were crushed for time. So that was what we had to do. This was another very rainy day where they just wanted to do the thing where we were out in the rain, which I was down for. But you can see whenever she's walking out how flat the lighting is, especially on rainy days. I think the biggest hurdle does end up being the lighting. Not so much like we can't walk here, we can't do this, but just that the lighting is so flat. We can see here she is perfectly evenly lit, but she's gonna walk over to where the tree is right in front of her, and that is where the lighting starts getting really, really nice because there's something buried to it. It's not just open, even lighting. So as she walks a bit closer, the lighting gets a little bit more varied. We can see that it's very much backlit at this point. She has these big trees behind her and off to the side, and so just putting any sort of variety into the lighting, making it less consistent and even is going to make it more interesting and pretty as a result. We were on the bridge for a couple portraits, and we just stayed close to these big trees so that it was varied, because if I had put them in the middle of that field, the lighting would have looked very uncool. So just by keeping them close to the trees, we were getting more variety in the lighting. We did end up shooting primarily indoors because this was a wedding where it was torrential downpour. So in situations like this, I'll try to take control of the inside lighting, asking if I can turn some lights off. This was a really nice building to be in, and we ended up just working with the really minimalist, moody lighting that was happening in there as a result. Even though there's a bunch of trees, it's still pretty even lighting. So by getting them closer to the trees, you can see that the light starts to be more directional, and you can tell that because as she's looking to the camera versus how she looks away, the lighting changes significantly. The lighting is a lot more flattering when she's looking into the light. My main focus anytime I'm in a situation where the lighting just isn't doing what I want it to do is to just make sure that I'm getting the most interesting compositions as possible, or that they are moving. Like just them smiling, looking at the camera is fine and good for beautiful glowy sunset lighting. I think it automatically just looks like a good picture, but in overcast lighting, you really have to emphasize more on like being a good photographer. So I really want to make sure that my compositions are fun and interesting. I really like the leading lines here. Here, I like the little splash of the headlights from the car behind them, keeping them moving, putting them up against dark stuff. So that is how we handled rain on this day. They were drenched at the end of it. But I'm also always down to shoot indoors. This is a wedding where it was super rainy, so we primarily ended up shooting indoors that day. We were shooting inside of this little library area. They had umbrellas, but you can see just how rainy it was. So we ended up shooting inside the Hirshhorn Museum. So most of their portraits that took place that day were amongst the art. So this picture was literally just two escalators that cross each other in the museum. I was interested in just creating interesting compositions amongst the art that we were standing in. And we did venture outside for a couple, but we were just standing underneath this cool structure. Again, this is at an art museum, so it was fairly easy to make it look pretty cool, I think. But the lighting was very directional, so I had to make sure that I was keeping in mind where I was having them look as we were standing under this. And I think this picture is actually by Kate Ann, but I just wanted to show you just how rainy it actually was and why they weren't like standing out in it. The same things that apply to rainy days apply to overcast days. This was a particularly really cold day, so they wanted to do some inside anyway. I was cool with being outside because I was prepared with my hot hands and my electric socks. But we did some pictures of them sitting inside some cafes, which I thought was really cute, especially now that things are opening back up. Having a cafe as a backup plan is ace. I've only been kicked out of a couple places, so I think this is a really good option. If clients are cool with going ahead with the shoot on an overcast day, it is really just my job to really make sure that I'm stepping it up with the compositions and the posing. Here, I'm trying to be really intentional with the framing, and basically every frame from this, I'm trying to make sure that I am getting interesting compositions with interesting framing and making sure that I'm putting them up against darker things so that way they stand out from the background. The only way that you're going to get any sort of glow around a person whenever they are standing in super even lighting is to make sure that you're just putting them up against something that's like pretty dark. Here's a day that is super overcast, and we actually ended up doing another session the day before, which is something that I offered for them to do. They really wanted to get married on their specific wedding day, but they were worried about the rain. I was like, we can shoot 2 days. I have a camera and I have a free day and we can do that. So we ended up shooting 2 days in a row. The first day was pretty sunny, and the second day we shot in the exact same place and it was overcast. It was actually really cool for me because it meant that I got to approach the location in 2 totally different ways, but I just wanted to show you this example so you can see just how overcast it was, and my focus was really on putting them in interesting compositions and backing them up to these walls as much as possible. So I was climbing on stuff and I had them look up at me. By putting them in between these 2 walls, we were absorbing the light on either side of them, and that created more directionality there too. And in situations like overcast days, I don't recommend things like fill cards for the most part. Bringing a giant scrim might make a little bit of a difference. I would need something to be this size to create any sort of reflection. For the most part, on overcast days, you don't really have enough light to bounce off of stuff. So I think the best option is not to try to like create fill light by bouncing, because there isn't a lot of light to bounce. I think the best option in overcast light is just to remove the light wherever you can. And I think that that is the best way to create directionality. There are lots of ways for you to do that in most environments. This was a day that was super snowy, and I just wanted to give you a feel for what this room looked like. There's going to be a picture that's taken over here. I'm going to close the doors a little bit. So this is what the circular window looks like whenever I have stopped down and made it quite a bit darker. This is what it looks like whenever I am exposing for their body. It's two very different feels. This is another one where I'm exposing for their bodies using this window. But I was able to get a lot of really different looks by using this window just by changing the exposure that I was using. Here's that door I was talking about. Just by moving people closer to light sources like windows and away from light sources, you're able to change the exposure and the look of the image dramatically. But we did wander outside. And I would actually say that snow is not a challenging situation to shoot in. It's like shooting on a beach when it's overcast. Everything is pretty even, but it's also like pretty. Like, it's nice to look at. So my emphasis when we were outside is just to get interesting compositions, make sure we were getting movement in a lot of the photos. This picture wouldn't have been so great if she would have been looking at me. And I know I've said this before, there's no such thing as bad lighting, but not every lighting will work for every pose. So in this lighting in particular, I really wanted to make sure that it was about their connection and them kissing instead of like them looking at the camera and smiling here. I really wanted to focus on making sure that I was getting interesting posing and interesting compositions. Here I am literally like leaning up against a car because this just happened to be some brush that was next to a parking lot. Here's more snowy pictures where the lighting is super even, but I think my emphasis on this day was making sure that I was getting a lot of stuff in the background so that way you could see all of the pretty atmospheric stuff that was happening with the snow. So that was really my emphasis for the day, but anytime I did get close up, I was making sure that I was focusing on my framing, especially because she was wearing a white hat. I really wanted to make sure that there was some good contrast happening there. This is another day that was super overcast and very wet on the ground. And I just wanted to show you this example because even when we think it's really overcast lighting, there's probably some directional light happening if you're not seeing it in a field. So here they are looking at me, and here they are backed up against something dark. And you can just tell by the way the light is filled in on their faces that the lighting is very directional, that this is literally just me having them stand on the other side of the wall, and the lighting changed within 10 feet. I mentioned this already, but I have another great example. Whenever the lighting is overcast but a little bit directional, which it typically is, you want to make sure that you are backing people up to dark stuff because this is the exact same lighting as this, but here they look like they're glowing like little angels standing in front of a bush. But here their highlights are sort of blending in with the sky that's also kind of blown out in the background. Being really intentional with your framing and making sure that you're framing your subjects up against darker things can be really helpful when you're dealing with really even lighting. Same thing here, we have really even lighting, and I like this and everything, but it's not the most interesting. But I really had to take it upon myself to be a good photographer and focus more on my framing and guiding and composing to make this look more interesting. I do have some additional slides that you may have seen if you've ever seen my lighting talk. These slides are from a lighting talk that I've been giving for years and years, and it's the exact same principles that I use today. Whenever you have people that are standing out in an open field or a situation where it's like super overcast, getting them up against something really dark can create really nice dimensional lighting. I think it ends up looking like really beautiful studio lighting as a result. I think it's important to remember that unless you're standing directly in the center of an overcast field, that there is some directional lighting. I think that you have to make it look a little bit more interesting by backing people up to a dark space. By putting them up against something dark, I think it legit looks editorial. Like the lighting is so nice. Just by putting him up against something dark, I am removing the lighting behind him and creating more directional lighting as a result. And another example showing the exact same thing. My goal is always just to put people up against something dark and have them look out at where the lighter stuff is. Here, they're just backed up to a forest. I feel like sometimes clients want to like have it look like they are in a forest, but I'm like, let's not go in the forest because it just looks like forest if you just keep going. If you stand on the edge of the forest, you still look like you're inside the forest. So that is how I handle inclement weather. I make it really easy for my clients to reschedule. I make sure that I am prepared for bad weather by bringing stuff that I need to deal with the weather and leaving stuff at home that I can't deal with the weather in. I'm okay taking over the lighting situation if I'm in a building and I need to change things up. I feel okay doing that, and I try not to be too reliant on the lighting situation to make my portraits interesting. I want to make sure that I'm focusing on framing and getting good client interaction and making sure that I'm getting my clients moving to keep it looking interesting. I hope this was helpful. This was a great suggestion. I am excited to complete this video by going out and doing a live shoot as soon as the weather agrees, which again, like, I can't believe the irony of the weather not agreeing with me on the day that I'm doing a video about lighting, but that's just our lives, I think. That is cold. My camera cut off before I had a chance to say bye. I talked for a long time, so I get it if my camera was just done. But I wanted to say thank you so much for listening. I love when you guys ask questions because they end up being like entire videos, and I really appreciate it. But the next day that comes this month that is overcast, I will be going out and doing a live shoot where it's just me with my iPhone. It's going to be very similar to the lighting video that I did for you guys last time. If you haven't seen that yet, check it out because I look ridiculous in it, but it sort of sets up the principles of lighting. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for asking me questions and being so nice, and for your patience because this video came out later than it usually does, and I'm really grateful that you're here. So, okay, I will talk to you soon. Bye! Do I look buff? Yeah, I do.